Jackie Lambie also reckons MPs should be drug tested here at Parliament House, which most appear open to. So on that note, let's bring in today's political panel. I'm joined in the studio by Victorian Liberal Senator James Paterson and Labor frontbencher and member for Hotham, Clare O'Neil. Thank you for joining us here. We'll get to the government's agenda in just a moment, but James, I wanted to start with you because a little while ago in the Senate, you effectively lost a vote on a national anti-corruption commission. A Greens private members bill got up. How on earth did this happen?
Well, this is just a political stunt by the Greens because money bills cannot originate in the Senate. So this national ICAC that the Greens proposed to establish, they've also proposed to establish with $0 of funding. So it will now go to the House of Representatives. If the government were to agree to it, we would have a national ICAC that would have no funding. So it couldn't employ anyone, it couldn't do any work. It's just a political stunt. What surprised me is that the Labor Party, who obviously sincerely support an ICAC, and fair enough, voted for something that they know cannot be established because it will have no funding. This is a serious issue that deserves very serious and careful consideration, which the government is giving it, and we will introduce a national ICAC. But when we do, we'll introduce one that has funding.
How did it go to a vote though, and the government lose that? You know, the government controls the legislative agenda. How did you lose this vote?
Well, we do control the legislative agenda, but as you know, Jane, we don't have a majority in the Senate, and so we don't have complete control over the Senate agenda. Every Monday morning, a couple of hours is set aside for private senators' time, and crossbenchers typically move their bills in there. In this case, the speaking list was exhausted. It went to a vote. One Nation had indicated during the debate that they opposed the bill, but they then didn't attend the vote. They effectively abstained from the vote, and that's for them to explain as to why they did. Okay,
so now this bill goes to the lower house. The government will use its numbers there to kill it? Is that...
I don't anticipate an unfunded ICAC will be passing the House of Representatives. It would be an irresponsible thing for the government to do.
Would it be a bad look, though, for the government, considering that we know that generally anti-corruption commissions have a lot of community support, to vote against setting up that kind of a body in the lower house?
Well, I don't think the public wants an unfunded national ICAC. I think they want a proper ICAC that has been carefully established by the government, and we'll be doing that in due course.
All right, well, let's move on to the other issue of the day, and that is this proposal to have drug tests for welfare recipients. Jackie Lambie has said that she thinks politicians should also be drug tested. I know, James, yesterday you came to Canberra saying you're happy for that if indeed it goes ahead. Clare O'Neil, how do you feel about MPs being drug tested at Parliament?
Look, I'm really happy to be drug tested. I think if that's what happens, then that's fine. But I think it does sort of highlight a little bit how really silly this is. You know, there's no evidence that drug testing welfare recipients is going to help a single Australian get off drugs. And what Labor believes in is public policy that's properly evidence-based, especially when it comes to crucial issues like these people who are often the most disadvantaged in our community. So we've got some real questions about this proposal, and we'll wait to see the bill, but pretty concerned about it.
So Jackie Lambie has said that she will only vote for this bill in the Senate if the government pours money into rehab services. If the government did that, would Labor look at shifting its position on this particular policy?
So it's a really good point that you raised. So the government's put forward a policy that says it wants to drug test welfare recipients when we know that we don't even have enough treatment support available for people who already have identified that they want to get help. So I think it's important that Jackie's raised that issue. But if we can just step back from this, Jane, what we know is that this is a public policy proposal that's got no evidence backing. It's been tried overseas and we know that it hasn't worked. And what the government's really trying to do here is spend all this time that we're here in Canberra talking about these issues where they want to have the debate instead of what is the single biggest problem facing Australia today, and that is the state of our national economy. All of these welfare discussions that we're having at the moment, they're not going to create a single job for an Australian who's out of work. We know that there are many multiples more people who are unemployed than the jobs available. We've got the slowest growth since the global financial crisis, and that's really what we should be talking about in Parliament this week.
We'll definitely get to the economy in a little while, but James, Labor has pointed out that about a quarter of the people on New Start allowance are over the age of 55, and this morning the Deputy Labor leader Richard Marles said it'd be pretty humiliating for a person of that age to, in his words, pee in a cup to then get their welfare payment. Do you think he's got a fair point there?
I think there's a couple of things to stress about this proposal, Jane. First of all, it's not making any moral judgment about people on welfare. It's about getting them the support that they need to get off drugs. You can't find gainful employment if you've got substance abuse problems and people need help. The second thing to point out is this is just a trial. It'll apply to 5,000 people in 3 different locations.
Do you know how they'll be selected, how those 5,000 people would be selected?
Well, the trial sites have been selected, and then all people of working age on welfare in those trial sites will be subject to this regime. And it's really important that we do test and trial things like this. I think there's good reason to believe it will be successful, but let's find out. Before we roll anything out like this on a national scale, let's test it, let's see what the evidence is, and we can consider that.
So you don't think it would be humiliating for a person over the age of 55 to have a drug test in order to get their welfare support?
No, I don't think that changes no matter what your age is. I think it's important that if you are on welfare to demonstrate that you are trying to find employment, and if you're addicted to drugs, you're going to find that very hard to do, and we're about helping people find that employment.
All right, well, Clare O'Neil, just finishing up on this.
You say that we're about people finding employment, but can I just stress again, James, this is not going to create a single job. I mean, you're not advocating that, are you?
Well, we've created 1.3 million new jobs since we were elected to government in 2013. I think we stand on that record of job creation. It's a pretty strong record.
I don't agree with that, because that's roughly the number of people who have come into the labour market in that time. The unemployment rate's almost exactly the same as it was when you got elected.
It's in fact lower than it was when we were elected, lower than it was when you lost government.
Almost exactly the same, but it's just disappointing to me that you're talking about this as though this is about the concern for the people who are at the end of this system, which is welfare recipients. And I think what you're trying to do is shift the conversation onto those people to say that there's something wrong with those people because they're unemployed. And actually the problem is that there are not enough jobs, and that's evidenced by the fact that there are many more people who are on unemployment benefits than there are jobs available at the moment.
Claire,
and that's on you.
If you think that someone can be on ice and turn up to a job interview and do
one's
well,
suggesting that,
then I have to disagree with you.
All right, this is a very spirited debate, but let's just quickly bring it back to this policy at hand. Clare O'Neil, has Labor's position hardened? Will you be voting against this plan to drug test welfare recipients?
Well, we need to see a little bit more of it. As I understand it at the moment, there isn't actually a bill before the Parliament. So we're having this discussion and debate here, as I say. It really is a distraction from the issues that are most important to the nation today, and that is the state of the economy and the fact that we've got the slowest growth since the global financial crisis, when really things should be doing a lot better. So we'd love to have a more fixed view on it, but the government actually needs to get to work and write a bill before we can get to that.
Well, we'll eagerly anticipate the details of the bill. But James Paterson, we keep hearing this phrase, or I suppose we've started hearing this phrase, compassionate conservatism, from your side when it comes to welfare policies. What exactly is that?
Well, it's about recognising that we're dealing with our fellow Australians here, who are human beings and deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. And it's about making very clear that we don't want to demonise anyone or make any moral judgments about them. We just want to help them. A life on welfare, particularly if you're addicted to drugs, is not a good life for you at all. It's not good for your community. It's not good for society. We want to help you to get out of that situation, and we want to provide you with the tools that you need to do that. And I should add, to address Senator Lambie's concerns, in this package is $10 million worth of funding for those support services to make sure that if you are found to be using drugs twice on this test and you are referred to support services, that the services are there to help you get the help you need.
What do you say to critics who label these kind of policies very paternalistic interventionist? Is it that, or is it compassionate conservatism?
Well, I understand why people have those concerns, but I don't think we're doing anyone any favours by handing them welfare and demanding nothing in return. I think if you're going to give taxpayers' money to people, then that comes with certain expectations. We have mutual obligation in this country. I think that's worked by and large very well. We have to make sure that we have high expectations for all Australians, regardless of the station of life they come from.
All right, well, Jackie Lambie, as we've been mentioning, is becoming sort of the woman of the moment. She holds the key to some of the government's agenda in the upper house. She's telling Parliament that she will block the government's union busting bill, or, ensuring integrity bill, whatever you want to call it, but only if John Setka stands down from the CFMEU. Clare O'Neil, you're from Victoria, as you know all the issues surrounding Mr Setka. How much pressure is he to stand down? How much pressure is he under, rather, to stand down?
I don't have any special insight into that. I've never met John Setka, and I don't know the inner workings of what's going on for him in his own mind. But you'll see that, our Labor leader, Anthony Albanese, has taken a really strong stance against some of Mr Setka's past conduct. He's in the process of being removed from the Labor Party, and that's a decision that I very much support. And I think Senator Lambie's put a very strong view forward, and I'm interested to see what happens next.
Well, where does Labor go from here? Because, of course, Anthony Albanese's made it very clear that he wants John Setka to be removed from the party. Mr Setka's gone through the courts to stop that happening, and it's still really in limbo. How likely is it that you think he'll actually stand down?
I'm not sure what's going to happen from here, Jane, but if I can just make the point that from the Labor point of view, we're doing what we can to stand aside from the conduct that Mr Setka's been involved in. We don't believe it's appropriate for someone to be in our party who's illustrated values which are anathema to what we stand on, and I'm talking there about some of the harassment issues that have that he's got himself wound up in. So we're doing what we can. I think it's important that, a political leader in this country can't force a union leader to resign. I don't think Senator Paterson or I would have it any other way. But I think the conduct that's been put forward here is inappropriate, and the Labor Party's made that very clear, and we are in the process of removing him as a Labor Party member.
Okay, well, finally, let's just touch on the economy. It has been dominating headlines. The Prime Minister says he likes to set tests for Labor ahead of sitting weeks. Labor says the Prime Minister's doing everything he can to avoid talking about the economy. James Paterson, we know it's not all kind of hunky-dory when it comes to the economy, but you wouldn't necessarily know that listening to the language used by the Treasurer and Finance Minister. Do you think we need to be having a more realistic or sophisticated conversation about the state of the economy at the moment?
I think we have to be very aware of the global economic headwinds that we face and every other country faces, but at the same time we shouldn't unnecessarily talk down the Australian economy. Our relative economics performance compared to most of the rest of the world is actually very strong. We are one of the faster growing countries in the G20. Much of Europe is in fact in recession, going backwards, and Australia is not. Long may that remain the case. We certainly can't afford to be complacent, but I think actually we should be proud of the fact that we are going relatively well.
But 0.4% growth in this quarter, that's not something to necessarily be celebrating, is it?
Well, it's definitely better than the alternative. Before those figures were released, there are a lot of commentators who were saying that we would have a negative quarter of economic growth. We're a long way away from a negative quarter of economic growth. We still have positive growth, and there's reason to believe that the next quarter will be more positive because we'll see the full effects of the interest rate cuts that the Reserve Bank has done, plus the government's personal income tax cuts flowing through. So we're hopeful that there will be improvement in those figures and that will remain well free of that kind of negative economic growth scenario.
And just finishing off with you, Clare O'Neil, the government's obviously determined to deliver its projected surplus this year, but if it becomes apparent that the country really needs some stimulus, needs some spending, I suppose where does the balance lie? What's more important, delivering the surplus or actually delivering stimulus to the economy?
Well, that's going to be a matter for the government to manage in conjunction with Treasury, but I am very worried about it. We've got the slowest growth in Australia since the global financial crisis. One of the things that's worrying me most is although the economy is growing, ordinary households are going backwards. We're in a per capita recession in Australia, so a lot of the people who are watching at home who are hearing about economic growth are probably thinking that doesn't fit with my family circumstances, and that is why. We've got terrible stagnating wages in Australia. These are very critical issues for the government to deal with, and instead of seeing a plan for jobs, a plan for the economy, we come back for a sitting week and here we are talking about dog whistle issues that the government wants us to be looking at instead of those, and I find that really disappointing.
All right, on that note, Clare O'Neil, James Paterson, we'll have to leave it there with just 5 minutes to go until question time. Thank you both for joining us.
Thanks, Jane.